Good morning, everyone. I already rang the gong, but let me ring it again, this time thoughtfully so that we can listen as the sound fills the sanctuary, bringing mind and heart and spirit together as one. Our members and friends and visitors, both at home on Zoom and in the sanctuary this morning, we welcome you. We are the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River, a church that is relevant in our lives, active in the world, and grounded in love and justice. Wherever you are on your life's path, whatever your faith tradition, whomever you love, how heavy or light your heart might be this morning, you are welcome here. My name is Annie Lavin, and I'm your service leader this morning. We are pleased to welcome Reverend James Gibbons Walker back to the pulpit. He drives up from Baltimore every morning to be with us, and we are grateful. After retiring from more than 30, well, first of all, let me say, many of you remember James. He was here not that long ago. He has been a UU since 1993. And after retiring from more than 30-year career as a crisis counselor and a psychiatric social worker, James served as minister to the UU Fellowship of Southern Maryland. While there, he was a founding board member of PFLAG of Leonardtown, and he officiated at the first religious same-sex marriage in Southern Maryland. He's back in Baltimore now at the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore since 2020. And we are grateful that he's here today. His sermon is entitled The Secret Six. We'll hear more about that in a few minutes. And our thanks to Michael Casey and, of course, the tech team. Your names are in the order of service. We have a couple of announcements this morning. Today is the day of our Great Valentine Cookie Giveaway. The cookies are right out there on the credenza in the foyer. If you ordered a box, look for your name in a yellow sticky that's on one of the boxes. And if you didn't and would like a box, we do have extras. Just grab a box that doesn't have a reserved name on it and enjoy the sweetness inside. And thanks to the bakers. And the second announcement is about the stewardship campaign. It's in full swing. Please remember to send in your pledge forms. We are at 24%. And there are extra pledge forms on the in the foyer on the poster if you would like to do it today. So thanks for that. And now, let us begin.
As Annie lights our chalice, I invite you to join with me in the chalice lighting words by Reverend Talos Whitfield, which are in your order of service. With the kindling of our flame, we recognize the fragility of life and our own vulnerability as we navigate challenges that always seem to come. May this light remind us of the strength we possess as individuals and collectively as a community to lean into and respond, finding our way forward together. Now please hear these words of Tamara Layback, a prayer for courage, which I will read and Annie will read. Spirit of life, who has given us the breath of life, today we remember to breathe deeply, to rest, to take in, to pause before we act.
And then to take in another deep breath, poised on the edge, and risk jumping in, risk taking action, risk speaking up, risk using the gifts we have been given.
So that at the end of our life, we can say with absolute clarity that no part of our existence was wasted in fear of failure or fear of success. Prepare us the way to begin to offer the gift of our awakened presence, full of love and light today. These are the prayers of our hearts that we lift up now as we begin our service.
Well, for opening words, I want to ask a question to start with. Did you ever notice how when you're reading history, maybe a good historical novel, or maybe you're in a discussion involving past wars and turmoil, hard decision-making, perhaps moral crisis? Let's be honest, we usually find ourselves pretty certain of how we would have acted had we been back there at that time in that circumstance. Oh, what brave actions we would have taken, and on which side we would have stood and fought, perhaps giving our lives. And for sure, it would have been on the side of wisdom and righteousness. How clear it seems to us today, with the perspective of time, to look back and know how we would have acted back in times of decision-making. In a poem by Peter Friedrichs entitled Embracing Darkness, I'll just read a couple lines from it, and he says, I know, if you could go back, you would have walked bravely with Jesus despite the naysayers. You would have marched with Reverend King, maybe even assassinated Hitler. At least hide Jews in the basement despite the penalty of death by the Nazis. It would have all been so clear to you, of course. But people then, just like people today, were baffled. They were frightened. They had bills to pay and they had children they didn't understand. And they too were desperate for normalcy. They sometimes made anything seem normal. And let's not forget fear, which was sitting heavy on their shoulders, just as it does with us today. This morning, Reverend Walker is going to take us back through history, back 163 years ago to the clash of principles on the eve of the Civil War. He'll introduce us to 6 prestigious men, they're in your order of service, and how they supported and financed John Brown's Harper's Ferry raid. That was the raid in 1859 when John Brown led 19 men, including 2 of his own boys, his sons, to Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, to make war on slavery. And supporting all this are those secret men of education and means. They were friends of Brown, who enabled its insurrection against the United States government, and then disappeared when it failed. Reverend Givens will then lead us to questions about means and ends, morality, and the greater good. Maybe we'll even have a chance to decide what we would have done if we had been back there at that time. Join us now as we sing our first hymn this morning. It's number 112. It's in your gray hymnal entitled, Do You Hear? This is one of the songs that we haven't sung very often, maybe ever at all, but we're trying to expand our selection of songs. So just bring all of your determination and good voices to this. And now I'd like to take a moment or two and invite you into a time of quiet, time of thoughtfulness, a time of reflection. You might have seen those wonderful red cookie boxes and other signs of Valentine's Day. Well, I had to include something about love, so I found this wonderful, at least to me, writing by David Blanchard. And it's called Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places. And I know some of you are tapping your foot right about now, remembering that song. Many of us look for love in the most obvious places, and as a result, most of us come away disappointed. It's as if we're still grade school kids counting Valentines as a measure of what matters. The love that matters is not typically the subject of sonnets or love songs. Consider this. There can be love in being told we're wrong. There can be love in sharing a regret. There can be love in asking for help. There can be love in communicating hurt. And there can be love in telling hard truths. Most of us find it painful to live at this level of love, but it can be there even in the most unlikely places. It isn't the kind of love we've been promised in fairy tales of princes and fairy godmothers, but it is the kind experienced by frogs and dwarfs. It's the sort of love that can bring us closer to finding the missing pieces of ourselves that we need to make us whole. Some of us, the most loving things I've ever experienced, I haven't been ready for, wasn't looking for, nearly didn't recognize. A few of them I didn't want, but all of them have changed me, transformed some part of me, filled in a place that I didn't even know was empty. So when the Valentines have been tucked away, the candy eaten, the flowers faded and gone, There will be other legacies of love that will last as long as we do, because they have brought us to know an element of life, part feeling, part idea, part mystery, that once known is ours to keep. Let us take a moment to think about that kind of love, when we may have given it, when we might have received it. Blessed be. And now we have acknowledgments of the heart, a time when we share our joys and concerns. I will light the candles, if you will come up and use the mic to share yours. I'll light the first one this morning for any of us who may be carrying a weight, physical, mental, emotional, that we may find healing and peace. That's a big one. Does anyone have a joy or concern they would like to mention in the mic, and I light the candles?
I ask you to please remember and hold in your hearts First Unitarian Church of Baltimore, the congregation which I serve as an affiliate minister. Our lead minister, David Olson, retired back in September, and so Mike Franch, whom you all know, and I have been filling in the pulpit one Sunday a month, each of us, and we've had guest ministers and people from the congregation leading the services the other times. We are in the midst of trying to figure out where we want to go. You know, what sort of structure we want to have for our historic congregation. And we need all your prayers and your good thoughts.
Most of you know Cynthia Ramsey, who turned 100 in October. Ted and I took her out to lunch yesterday, as well as taking her to an art show at the Biggs Museum in Dover, which, by the way, was gorgeous, had a glass exhibit. And we went to a new Pakistani restaurant, and there were probably 4 people in there eating. And so the waitress, I told, she has some very specific requirements when Cynthia eats, which is warm water with lemon and a spoon, so she can make her warm lemonade. So they brought that, and then she looked at the menu and she said, "I'd like something that's not spicy." So that was a bit of a challenge. So the waitress suggested a few things, and then she came back and brought her dish, and the chef came out, and the chef was her mother. And she said, "Now, you let me know if it's too spicy." Cynthia said, "Oh, yes, it is." So she brought her out some sour cream and some yogurt and all these things. So that was okay. And then as the lunch moved on, out comes the chef with the rest of our lunch on a tray, and she sets it on the table, and she said, "I would like a picture with you." So she gets over and stands next to Cynthia, and she said, "Now I want to hold your hand." And so they do this whole thing and take a picture. So it was really very cute. And one of the things I do is I always secretly tell people that she's 100, which is really fun to see their reaction. So this was one of those.
I'll light a final candle this morning for all the joys and sorrows, concerns that might be unspoken in your hearts this morning. Let us take a moment to reflect. Amen. We'll have our offering now, a time when we can support and sustain this place, which is special to so many of us, a place of memory and of hope. And now for our second hymn this morning, it's When Israel Was in Egypt's Land. This is kind of getting into the topic this morning. It's on page 104 in your gray hymnal. If you'll stand as you are able.
I invite you to turn to responsive reading number 579, back of your gray hymnal. I'll read the part in the Roman type, and I ask you to respond with the part in italic type. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground.
They do not rain without thunder and lightning. They want the oceans without the awful roar of its waters.
This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle.
Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will.
Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them.
The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress.
Thank you, Annie, and thank you everyone else involved in the team today of bringing together this service. Sedition, rebellion, the place of government in our lives, our responsibilities as citizens in response to a perceived tyranny have all been in the news these past few years. I think it's appropriate to reflect on some events in the history of our country, which led up to what is officially called the War of the Rebellion, and to share the stories of 5 New Englanders and 1 New Yorker, and to consider their actions and their possible motives in 1858 and 1859. This morning, I would like to tell their stories and then pose questions for our consideration about means and ends, morality, and the greater good. Part of today's message is that in difficult and challenging times, discussion, sharing observations openly, not keeping secrets, is crucial. And part of today's message is about the importance of proclaiming publicly who you are and who you want to be, even if that's risky or off-putting, and living with the consequences. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time. So let's look at our nation's history. The place of the federal government in the average person's life was very different in 1849. There were no taxes to pay. There was no real Justice Department. Many of the federal programs and agencies that we have come to rely on just weren't there. The federal government didn't touch people very much, and unless you were in the Army or the Navy or paid a tariff on imported goods, the only time you saw an employee of the federal government was when you got your mail. And postmasters throughout the South were permitted, even encouraged, to destroy abolitionist literature coming through their post offices, which they, as postmasters, saw as offensive. But all that began to change in 1850. As part of the Compromise of 1850, Congress enacted an enhanced Fugitive Slave Act, which made any person aiding a runaway slave by providing food or shelter subject to 6 months imprisonment and a $1,000 fine. This was when the average wage was $1 a day. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly. detailing for her readers the day-to-day horrors of slavery. And when Southerners complained that the incidents in her novel could not have happened in real life, she issued an annotated version, citing newspaper reports and sworn testimony to back up every atrocity. In 1854, in Boston, a man named Anthony Burns was arrested as a fugitive slave. The day the court ruled that Burns had to be returned to his owner, federal troops sent by President Franklin Pierce held Boston under martial law until he was put on the ship. Armed soldiers lined the streets between the courthouse and the harbor to hold back the waves of protesters as Burns was escorted to the ship for return to his Virginia master. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act passed, leaving it up to the members of these territories to decide if they would become free or slave states. Groups of abolitionists, particularly in New York and New England, sponsored settlers to Kansas. Indeed, the first established church in Kansas was a Unitarian church, in an attempt to influence the vote. And violent clashes between armed settlers became commonplace over the next 4 years. They called it Bleeding Kansas. In 1856, violence spread to the halls of Congress. After Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner made a speech condemning the violence in Kansas and calling a fellow senator Don Quixote embracing the harlot slavery. Boy, they knew how to make a speech in those days. The senator's nephew, Representative Preston Smith Brooks of South Carolina, took offense. Brooks decided that Sumner was no gentleman and hence not suitable to challenge to a duel. Rather, he decided that Sumner should be beaten like a dog. So Brooks went to the Senate chamber that very day and beat Sumner senseless with a hard rubber truncheon-like cane. Sumner took 3 years to recover. In 1857, in the case of Dred Scott, a man who sued for his freedom and the freedom of his family because they had lived for years in areas of the United States where slavery was illegal, the U.S. Supreme Court held that African Americans were, quote, beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior, they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. Now, according to the census of 1860, there were about 3,900,000 people held in slavery in the United States. Close to 4 million people who, if they tried to run away, faced the power and authority of the state and federal governments. Close to 4 million people who had the legal status, according to the Supreme Court, of a mule or a chair. Close to 4 million people who could be beaten like a dog. I know this review took a while, but I wanted you to be clear about the tenor of the times we're talking about. The people you're about to meet had known John Brown for some years. They had supported his exploits in Kansas, which included violence against pro-slavery settlers. But in 1857 and 1858, they were being asked by Brown to support a new plan, one that he had been thinking about for decades, to take and hold the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry for a day or two. Then gather up the slaves who would surely rise up in rebellion and fall back into the Appalachians to build an ideal society in a mountain fortress to which other slaves could flee, thereby forcing the end of slavery in the United States. These 6 men whom you're going to meet formed an informal committee of support, provided money and weapons, and encouraged donations from others for the project. The attack on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry in October of 1859 failed. The few slaves in the area around Harper's Ferry did not flock to Brown. He did not escape to the mountains. After a bloody standoff in which several members of his party and several citizens of Harper's Ferry were killed, he was captured, tried, and on December 1859 hung, as were the surviving members of his group. You have a handout with information about each of the so-called Secret 6. Annie and I will introduce them to you. Dr. Samuel Ridley Howe was the founder of the Perkins School for the Blind, a pioneer teacher of persons mentally and physically challenged. He joined his wife, Julia Ward Howe, who wrote John Brown's Body, in championing social reforms ranging from improvements in education to the abolition of slavery. And after Brown was arrested, Howe published a disclaimer of any involvement and fled the country to Canada.
Unitarian minister Theodore Parker was a strong supporter of slave revolts, women's rights, temperance, and prison reform. His radicalism, fueled by enactment of the Fugitive Slave Act, Parker participated in the attempted rescue of fugitive slaves and formed a vigilance committee in Boston to fight those seeking to capture them. At the time of the attack on Harper's Ferry, he was in Rome dying of tuberculosis. He wrote, "One held against his will as a slave has a natural right to kill everyone who seeks to prevent his enjoyment of liberty."
Concord resident and Harvard-educated Franklin Sanborn founded a school while only in his mid-20s. Emerson's children were among his students. As the secretary of the Massachusetts State Kansas Committee, he introduced Brown to Parker and Higginson. They also arranged for Brown to make a plea for financial support to the Massachusetts legislature, but the bill to aid the Kansas anti-slavery efforts failed. After the attack, he twice fled to Canada, fearing arrest. And in April of 1860, federal marshals attempted to arrest him, but the townspeople of Concord prevented his arrest.
Millionaire landowner and anti-slavery philanthropist Gerrit Smith of Petersboro, New York, was the first member of the Secret 6 to meet John Brown. He vacillated between supporting peaceful resistance to slavery and Brown-styled militants. Following Brown's arrest at Harper's Ferry, Smith destroyed documents that could link him to Brown. He became so fearful that his connections to Brown would be exposed, and he broke down and he spent months in a New York mental institution.
President of the Massachusetts Kansas Committee, George Luther Stearns, took to Brown like iron to the magnet, according to Stearns' son, and he became the chief contributor of both funds and arms to Brown. Following Brown's capture, Stearns fled to Canada, where he remained until after Brown's execution. However, he later said, "I considered it the proudest act of my life that I gave good old John Brown every pike and rifle he carried to Harper's Ferry."
And finally, we have Thomas Wentworth Higginson, a Worcester, Massachusetts Unitarian minister. He was among Brown's strongest backers. He was from one of the oldest families in New England. He counted among his friends Henry David Thoreau and Amos Alcott, father of Louisa May Alcott. When he learned that other members of the Secret Six were abandoning Brown after his arrest, he wrote to Franklin Sanborn, "Is there no such thing as honor among Confederates?"
Thomas Wentworth Higginson we see in his Army uniform. He was the colonel of the 1st South Carolina Volunteers, one of the first African American regiments formed during the Civil War. Now, I think a person's actions, as Annie has said to us earlier, and I agree, are shaped by the sum of how she or he has lived up to that moment of decision. So why would these 6 men of virtue and character, teachers, philanthropists, ministers of religion, good people doing undeniably good things, decide to commit treason against the United States? Now, the Constitution defines treason as levying war against the United States or adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. I'm not a lawyer, but seizing a federal arsenal and shooting at federal troops sounds like war or domestic terrorism to me. And why would most of them, after the deed was done, panic at the enormity of it? Supposedly they had pledged their support with their eyes wide open to what they were doing. John Brown knew what he was doing and why. He was asked if he had anything to say before the court sentenced him. He said, "I see the book kissed, which I suppose to be the Bible, which teaches me that all things whatsoever I would that a man should do to me, I should do even to them. It teaches me further to remember them that are in bonds, as bound with them. I endeavor to act upon that instruction. Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice, and mingle my blood further with the blood of my children, and with the blood of millions of this slave country, whose rights are disregarded by the wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I say, let it be done." John Brown believed that he was doing the will of God, following a set of rules that he had been taught and had preached himself in Calvinist churches. But what about the 6? What led them? What aligned their moral compass to decide that they should support terrorism, treason against the United States? I don't know, but I have some guesses. You know how to boil a frog, right? I understand you put the frog in water and increase the heat very gradually. The frog, being cold-blooded, accommodates. Maybe the Secret Six were caught in a slow slide from helping out the Underground Railroad and risking those $1,000 fines and 6 months in jail, to giving money to the Kansas Committee, some of which went to settlers, but some of which went to weapons, to giving to John Brown for Harper's Ferry. Or maybe it was what we used to call in the 60s radical chic. There is something attractive about a person who has no doubts. Perhaps some members of the Secret Six saw themselves as wimps, and John Brown as a man of action, a hero worthy of their support. Or perhaps they embraced the principle of a higher law. Disobedience to tyrants is obedience to God. They may have reasoned that some laws were worth breaking in the face of an ultimate evil, but not have thought through all the consequences. Or maybe, by 1859, after all the events I've just outlined, they thought violent action was the only way. I don't know. I just know that their support and their reactions afterwards make a cautionary case study. As people say, history not so much repeats itself, but it does rhyme. I want to hear your thoughts about means and ends, about when the law can be broken for the greater good. So here are my questions. What aligns your moral compass? A set of rules or a set of attitudes or virtues that are the sum of your life experiences? Or perhaps something else? What place does the input of others have in your decision making? And in the face of a seemingly intractable evil involving 4 million people, what would you do? Let's reflect and then talk. Excuse me. I think Annie will pass among you with the microphone so that everyone, both here and on Zoom, can hear what you have to say.
I was thinking maybe you want to repeat the question.
Sure.
What do you want to do? Oh.
Here's my questions. What aligns your moral compass? What place does the input of others have in your own decision making? And in the face of a seemingly intractable evil involving 4 million people, what would you do?
I'm not speaking personally, but I heard on the radio coming in this morning the words of a young man who's 22 now, but he was 17 when Parkland, the school in Parkland was violated by the man who shot 17 students. And he has been working on this project of gun control ever since, and he was asked a question because he had gone into this saying, just stop it now. And he's now 5 years older, and he said that didn't work, and he said he now looks at the fight against tobacco and thinks that over a period of many, many years, we might get to the place that he would like to be today.
The only fist fight I was ever in was in my schoolyard back in upstate New York, and it was in response to a bunch of my friends fighting, or rather beating, one of only 2 black students at our school. And it outraged me, and I jumped into it to defend this young guy. And I think that when you say what provokes you to take action, I think that we have to be in direct witness often, and too often, of such injustices. And most of the rest of the time, the greater majority of the time, we choose to insulate ourselves. And the world, or at least this country and many other countries, make that easy. You choose where to live so that you don't see that other stuff. And you choose to just kind of like lead your life with blinders on. And it really leads to this crescendo of injustice.
I think what motivates me to maybe speak up is my children, because sometimes I'll hear something, maybe from family members or other people that I don't agree with, and I know I'm not going to change them, but I don't want my children to think that I hear those things and I just say nothing.
I'm sorry, I was on the online, I was watching the online and I heard your topic and I wanted to be here in person, so I came here. Could you rephrase the question? I know what the topic is, but what was the question that was asked?
These are 6 people who are nice people,
I did hear the beginning of it, yes.
but they supported armed rebellion. What aligns your moral compass? What place does the input of others have in your decision-making? And in the face of a seemingly intractable evil involving 4 million people, what would you do?
Well, if I may speak from the man that I am in my shoes to the experiences that are usually not orthodox or to what other people experience. First of all, let me say I'm so glad to be with this group of people. You guys are some of the most open-minded people I've ran into. I digress from that for a moment. But what I do want to say is who I am, I see that there is this level, and there's words that can make people upset and do exactly what was spoke about. Like, by chance, have you heard the coined phrase, white fragility? That one makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But if you really understand the principle of that, it encompasses a lot of what you're talking about. And what that talks about is also how do you deal with it, especially when it's a new experience. Now, I hear a lot of advocation for Black recognition, and that's wonderful. I mean, civil rights and the 87 women's rights and all that. But there are some groups that don't have a voice, or the culture has kind of paved them over to be more subtle. And it's not a competition. I heard once, and I really like it, the idea, in oppression Olympics, everybody loses. And when you hear words like lynching, what do you think of? Of course, the stereotypical stuff that is great, that is getting attention. But if I told you that the greatest lynching in America was the Chinese, would that make you hear something new? So all I want to say in this is it's wonderful, this kind of recognition. But what if we go to even a subtler level? Do you hear the things that are uncomfortable to you? Or maybe not even raising your ear? Now, most of the times this type of topic makes people very uncomfortable, especially if you're not within that demographic. So it's so beautiful, wonderful that there is a platform here to be able to at least speak a little bit about it. And I just I know that was a little bit off tangent of what the topic was completely, but I feel like it's a big part of the umbrella that encompasses everything in it. And just to have that opportunity to speak, thank you so much.
Thank you.
As some of you know, I'm a nurse, and I have been for a really, really, really long time. It seems like it anyway. And I'm a baby nurse. I worked in neonatal intensive care, and I can tell you clearly that underneath the surface of the skin, all people have the same color muscles and blood. And that when babies are born, it is the exposure of light to their skin that gives them their color. So all babies are born white. Black babies are born very, very pale gray, and it isn't for 2 or 3 days that they develop any color, and not until 6 months or a year that they get their deep color. We're all the same.
I have thoughts from a couple of different directions. Knowing that obviously there are some times when taking action, even radical action against injustice, is the only reasonable option. The situation of slavery and abolitionism in the United States in the 1850s, that was such a situation. But at the same time, I think that there are a couple of risks when approaching a situation, such a situation, with the approach of violence. I guess one of them is obviously the risk of someone innocent being caught in the crossfire. One of the others is delegitimizing your own movement in the eyes of the general public. And I think the other main risk would be starting a sort of arms race between your faction and the other faction. I mean, the last thing you want to do is ignite some broader conflict where even more people will be hurt. So I mean, it's not like slavery shouldn't have been abolished as soon as possible, and it's not like there shouldn't have been any sort of radical action taken against slavery and the Fugitive Slave Act and its enforcement or anything. But I think John Brown's actions were very, very misguided, to say the least. I mean, just like in Kansas, that was a case where it started a sort of miniature arms race between the abolitionists and the slave owners. And I think if there's any reason not to take such violent action, I think that would be it. But I think preventing enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Acts, that would have been, I mean, scaling up resistance in other ways, I think that would have been 100% acceptable. And I think that would have been what I would have done.
Just very briefly, I'd like to note the similarity between everything that you said and the things that were said on January 6th.
Bingo.
The terminology was the same. The only difference was who your friends were and where you stood on the issue.
When I put this sermon together, I was telling somebody this before the service. When I put this sermon together, it was years before January 6th. And I keep hearing echoes. So yeah. Let me tell you a happy story. I have a children's story that I read sometimes, usually during Black History Month, about two friends, one white, one black, who look forward to the opening of the swimming pool in their neighborhood. And when they go to the swimming pool, they discover that the swimming pool has been filled with asphalt. These things happened in Maryland and other places in the 1950s. And when I told that story and the children got to listen to it, one of the children said afterwards, "Why wouldn't they let him in the swimming pool?" And I thought to myself, this is so great that this kid doesn't know. why they wouldn't let a little black kid into the swimming pool. There's hope, okay? But thinking about your children, thinking about what actions you would take, all of these are important things. Annie, have we made a decision about what
We have,
we're gonna do?
yeah, we'll do the closing words now.
Okay. Closing words are from W.E.B. Du Bois. The prayer of our souls is a petition for persistence, not for the one good deed or the single thought, but deed on deed and thought on thought until day calling unto day shall make a life worth living. May it be so.
Now we'll extinguish the flame. I think you know the words that are in the order of service. We extinguish this flame.
The warmth of community, with the fire of memories.
These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. And now. Taking it in ourselves and also sending it out into the world for all men, all women, all beings, that they may know love and peace. Have a wonderful week.